My name is Calvin Reeves, and I am 64 years old, and I have spent most of my life being the kind of man that people underestimate. Not because I am weak, because I am quiet. My son-in-law thought quiet meant simple. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a lot of things. It started with a phone call in March. My daughter Naomi called me on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual because Naomi never called on weekdays. She was always busy. That was what she told me anyway. Too busy to drive the 2 hours from Charlotte to Raleigh to visit me. Too busy to call on birthdays without a reminder from her husband. But that Tuesday she called, and her voice was warm and bright in a way that put me on edge immediately. The way a too-perfect sky before a storm puts you on edge. "Daddy, we want you to come stay with us for a while. Patrick and I have been talking about it. You've been alone in that house since Mom passed, and we just think it would do you good. Come see how we're living down here. Let us take care of you for once." I listened to the whole thing. I told her I would think about it. Then I called my old friend Theodore. Not the Theodore on that list of names my daughter keeps. My Theodore. Theo Winslow. We had been friends since the Army, since Fort Bragg in 1981, and he had been a private investigator for 30 years before his knees gave out. He still knew people. More importantly, he still knew how to listen. I told him about the call, about Naomi's voice, about the sudden invitation after 8 months of near silence following my wife Loretta's death. Theo was quiet for a moment. "Cal," he said, "you remember what Loretta always used to say about Patrick?" I did. I remembered exactly. Loretta had a way of reading people that I could never fully explain. She was a retired school principal from Durham who had spent 35 years watching children lie to her face, and after a while, you develop a radar for it that never fully turns off. She saw Patrick Drummond the first Thanksgiving he came to our house, saw the way he looked at the framed print of our beach house in the Outer Banks, and then looked at me and calculated something behind his eyes, and she put down her fork, and she said very quietly, so only I could hear, "That young man is not here for our daughter, Calvin. He's here for the inventory." I told her she was being too hard on him. She gave me the look she gave students when she already knew the answer and was waiting to see if they'd tell the truth. I should have listened then. Instead, I paid for the wedding. I paid for the down payment on their house in Charlotte because Naomi cried and said they just needed a start, just a foundation, and Patrick shook my hand and said, "Sir, I promise I will spend my life making your daughter happy." I helped them furnish the place. I co-signed on a car loan when Patrick's credit was temporarily bad, which turned out to be a condition rather than a phase. Loretta died 11 months ago, pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 4 months from diagnosis, and in the weeks after the funeral, Patrick and Naomi were attentive and present and concerned, and I thought, well, maybe Loretta was wrong. Maybe grief makes you generous. Then the calls slowed, then they stopped, then 8 months of quiet, and then the warm, bright Tuesday phone call. I booked a flight to Charlotte. The drive from the airport to their neighborhood took about 25 minutes. I had arranged to take a ride share rather than have them pick me up. I told Naomi the flight was later than it was. I wanted to arrive on my own terms, and I wanted a few minutes to look at the house before anyone knew I was there. The neighborhood was nice. Too nice for two people whose combined income, as far as I knew, was Patrick's mid-level marketing salary and Naomi's part-time work at a dental office. The houses were large. Their driveway had a new truck in it. A black one, the kind with the chrome package and the step bars, the kind that cost $60,000. The one I co-signed on 3 years ago was a Toyota Corolla. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The front of the house looked ordinary. Then I noticed the mailbox. It was so overstuffed that 2 envelopes had fallen out onto the ground below it, and one of them had a red striped border that I recognized from a distance. Final notice. A man came out of the house next door before I could move toward the mailbox. He was around my age, white-haired, wearing a denim shirt, carrying a pair of pruning shears like he had been gardening. He stopped when he saw me. He looked at the mailbox. He looked back at me. "You their family?" he asked. "Her father," I said. He set down the pruning shears. He walked to the edge of his yard, close enough to talk without shouting, and he glanced back at their house the way a man does when he doesn't want to be overheard. "Name's Cliff Abernathy," he said. "I've lived next door to your daughter and her husband for 3 years. He paused. "You need to know something before you go inside." I waited. Cliff told me that for the past several months, Patrick had been having conversations in the driveway that Cliff could hear from his garage. Loud conversations. The kind a man has when he thinks no one is listening. Cliff described a name he had heard repeated, someone called Denton, which he gathered was some kind of private lender, not a bank. The kind of arrangement where the interest compounds weekly and the consequences for non-payment are not legal ones. Cliff had also heard Patrick on the phone 2 weeks ago saying something that had stuck with him. He said, "The old man's coming to stay, and once he's here, we'll handle the rest." Those were his exact words. "The old man's coming, and once he's here, we'll handle the rest." I thanked Cliff Abernathy. I shook his hand, and I told him I was going to go check into a hotel and make some phone calls. He nodded, and he said, "I figured you weren't the kind of man who needed to be told twice, and I liked him immediately for that." I did not go to a hotel. I called Theo Winslow. I told him what Cliff had told me, and Theo was quiet in the way he gets when he is already working a problem. "You still have that attorney out of Greensboro?" he asked. I did. Audrey Mack. I had used her for the estate planning after Loretta's diagnosis, and she was the kind of lawyer who treated every document like a potential courtroom exhibit, which meant she was thorough in a way that sometimes seemed paranoid until the day it wasn't. "Call her tonight," Theo said. "Tell her what you told me. And Calvin, don't let them know you know anything. Go in tomorrow like you just flew in for a nice visit. Can you do that?" I told him I had spent 31 years as an insurance actuary assessing risk without letting people know what I was thinking. I thought I could manage. He laughed, then he got serious again. "Loretta would have seen all of this coming," he said. I told him I knew. I told him Loretta had already seen it, a long time ago. I checked into a Hampton Inn near the airport and I called Audrey Mack, and she answered on the third ring and listened without interrupting while I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Calvin," she said, "I want you to do something for me. Tomorrow when you go to their house, I want you to look for any documents they might have left accessible. Anything with your name on it, anything that looks like financial paperwork. Don't touch it. Don't move it. Just remember what you see." I told her I would. "And Calvin," she said, "you should know that Loretta called me. Back in September. About 2 months after she passed." She corrected herself. "I mean 2 months before. I'm sorry. She was not well, and she knew it, and she called me to add something to the estate documents. A codicil, a private one." I did not know what to say. "She told me not to tell you yet," Audrey said. "She said you'd figure out when the time was right." I think the time might be right. I lay in that hotel room for a long time that night. I did not sleep much. I thought about Loretta sitting in her hospital chair with the IV in her arm calling her attorney to arrange for a contingency she never told me about. I thought about what kind of woman does that, the kind who loves you so completely that she makes plans to protect you even from the grave. I went to the house the next morning at 9 o'clock with a small duffel bag and a box of pralines from a bakery near the hotel because that is what you bring when you visit your daughter. Naomi answered the door before I had finished climbing the porch steps. She was dressed nicely, her hair done, her smile wide and genuine looking in the way that performance smiles or when someone has practiced them. She hugged me. She smelled like expensive perfume. "Daddy," she said, "we are so glad you're here." Patrick appeared behind her. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with a firm handshake that he had clearly been told projected confidence. He shook my hand and clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Mr. Reeves, welcome. This is overdue. We should have done this months ago." I said yes, we should have. The inside of the house told a different story than the outside presented. The kitchen had new appliances. A refrigerator that was clearly a recent purchase because the plastic film was still on the handle, but the living room carpet was worn in the traffic patterns, the kind of wear you get when you stop replacing things. One of the windows had a crack in the seal that had fogged with condensation. The garage door, which I could see from the hallway, had a padlock on it. Not a combination lock, a serious padlock, the kind you use when you're storing something you don't want someone else to find by accident. I noticed these things. I did not say anything about them. Nandromi made coffee. Patrick sat across from me at the kitchen table and began talking, warmly and with great energy, about nothing. About the neighborhood. About a restaurant they had been to. About a friend's boat they had borrowed last summer. He was filling the air the way people do when they are nervous about what might fill it otherwise. I let him talk. After a while, Naomi sat down and the two of them exchanged a look. The kind of look that means we discussed this already, and this is the part where we start. Patrick leaned forward and put his elbows on the table and took on what I think he believed was a trustworthy expression. Mr. Reeves, he said, we actually have some exciting news, an opportunity we've been waiting a while to share with someone whose opinion we really value. I put down my coffee cup. I folded my hands. I gave him my most open and attentive face, the one I used for 31 years when a client was about to tell me something they believed and I already knew was wrong. He told me about the investment. A commercial real estate opportunity in the Ballantine area of Charlotte, a mixed-use development. Ground floor retail, upper floor residential. A group of private investors had a stake available, but the window was closing by Friday. Patrick had a contact on the inside. The returns were, and here he paused for effect, extraordinary. We're talking doubling the initial outlay in 18 months, he said. Conservative estimate. I looked at Naomi. She was watching me with careful eyes. How much was stake? I asked. We'd need $80,000 to secure our position, Patrick said. As a loan, of course, between family, we'd have it back to you before the end of next year. $80,000. Not 50. 80. Because they had looked at what I had and they had aimed a little higher. I let my face go soft and a little confused the way a man does when a number is bigger than you expected. Son, I said, and I watched Patrick's expression adjust slightly at the word, at the implied warmth of it. That is a serious amount of money. You know that since Loretta passed, I've had to be careful with the finances. She handled most of the investments. I'm still getting my bearings. Naomi reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Daddy, we know this is a lot to ask, but we really believe in this. And you've always believed in us. It was a good line. I could tell she had prepared it. I told them I needed to rest, that the flight had tired me, that I would think about it overnight, and we could talk tomorrow morning. Patrick's face moved through something quickly. I would call it impatience, dressed in patience's clothing. But he nodded. He said, of course. He said to take all the time I needed. That night I called Audrey Mack again. She told me she had spent the day making inquiries. She had contacts in the Charlotte area, a paralegal who did title research as a side practice, and what that paralegal had found was this. 4 weeks ago, someone had submitted a power of attorney application to a financial institution in Charlotte, claiming I had granted Patrick Drummond authority to act on my behalf in financial matters due to cognitive decline. The application had been flagged by the institution's compliance office because the supporting documentation was inconsistent. The notary seal on the accompanying letter was from a notary in Wake County. But the letter claimed to have been signed in Mecklenburg County. The institution had not processed the application, but they had not reported it either. Audrey's voice was tight when she told me this. Calvin, they were not trying to get a loan from you, she said. They were trying to get access to your accounts without your signature. The $80,000 ask is a backup plan. If you give it willingly, good. If not, they had paperwork in process to try to take it anyway. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed. I am not a man who gets rattled. 31 years of actuarial work teaches you that the worst outcomes are usually the ones that were statistically inevitable if you had just looked at the data correctly from the beginning. This was statistically inevitable. Loretta had looked at the data correctly from the beginning. Audrey, I said, what did Loretta put in the codicil? Audrey told me. Loretta had added a clause to the estate that stipulated specifically that in the event of documented financial misconduct directed at me by any individual named as a beneficiary or potential beneficiary or our joint estate, that individual's claim was immediately and permanently void, and that the affected portion of the estate would be redirected to a fund she had already established. The Loretta Reeves Educational Trust, set up quietly through Audrey's office 8 months before she died, funded with an initial endowment from a portion of the life insurance payout I had not yet known she had redirected. She'd also named someone to notify, Cliff Abernathy, the neighbor. His late wife and Loretta had been in the same book club for 6 years before his wife moved them to Charlotte for her work. Loretta had his number. She had called him, she had asked him to watch. I thought about my wife sitting in her hospital chair calling her book club friend's husband to ask him to be a witness if things went wrong. I did not cry, but it was close. The next morning I came down to breakfast, and Patrick had made eggs and the table was set nicely, and Naomi poured juice and it was all very warm and domestic. And about 20 minutes and Patrick said casually, like it had just occurred to him, "So Dad, did you get a chance to think any more about that opportunity?" Dad. He had never called me that before in 7 years of marriage. I set down my fork. I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked at my daughter. I've been thinking a lot, I said. Actually, I've been thinking about more than just the investment. I've been thinking about something I noticed when I arrived yesterday. Patrick's expression was very still. "The mailbox," I said. I noticed some mail had fallen out. There were some envelopes with red borders, the kind that come from creditors when a payment is very overdue. Naomi looked at the table. "And I noticed the truck in the driveway," I continued. "That's a new truck. Patrick, when I co-signed for the Corolla 3 years ago, you told me you had no credit available." "That was different," he started. "And I noticed the padlock on the garage," I said, "which is an unusual thing to have on the inside of your own home, in my experience." The silence in that kitchen was the particular kind of silence you only hear when everyone in the room knows the performance is over. But no one has said so yet. Patrick made one more attempt. He said they were going through a difficult period, but the investment would fix everything, that he just needed the opportunity to get things back on track, that the situation with Denton, and he stopped the moment he said the name, realizing he had said it, realizing I had heard it, and that I had not reacted with the confusion of someone hearing it for the first time. He saw it in my face. That I already knew. Naomi started crying. Real tears, I think. Whatever she had become under the pressure of living this kind of life, whatever corners she had let herself be pressed into, I do not believe she was entirely comfortable with what she had agreed to. She said, "Daddy, I'm sorry, things just got so bad, and Patrick said you had more than enough and that you would never even notice." "Naomi," I said quietly, "stop." She stopped. "I'm going to ask you one question," I said to Patrick, "and I want you to think carefully before you answer it. Did you file a power of attorney application in my name at a financial institution in Charlotte in the past 6 weeks?" The color left Patrick Drummond's face in a way I found almost interesting from a clinical standpoint. "I want a lawyer," he said. "That's probably wise," I said, "because mine is already on her way." Audrey Mack arrived at the house 45 minutes later. She was a small woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen better decades. And she walked into that kitchen and she set the briefcase on the table and she opened it and she laid out documents with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this many times and felt nothing but professionalism about it. She laid out the fraudulent power of attorney application. She laid out the financial institution's flagged report. She laid out a sworn statement from Cliff Abernathy, who had put in writing everything he had heard from his driveway over the past 4 months. And she laid out Loretta's codicil. She explained to Patrick and Naomi in plain and measured language what each document represented, what each document meant for them legally, what charges could be filed, what would happen to Naomi's share of the estate under the terms Loretta had written. Patrick sat across the table and he did not speak. His face cycled through several emotions, none of which were remorse. Naomi was shaking. "The codicil," Audrey said, looking at Naomi directly, "was written by your mother 8 months before she died. She anticipated this scenario specifically. She loved you enough to try to protect your father, even when she could no longer do it herself. I thought you should know that." Naomi put her face in her hands. I looked at my daughter and I felt something complicated that I do not have a single word for. It was grief and love and fury and pity, all wound together in a knot that sat right in the center of my chest. "What I do next," I said to Patrick, "depends entirely on what you do next. Audrey is going to tell you what cooperation looks like, and then you're going to decide what kind of man you want to be." What cooperation looked like was this. Patrick provided Audrey with the name and contact information for Denton, the private lender, as well as the details of the loan, the amount, the terms, and the fact that Denton had been operating without a consumer finance license in the state of North Carolina, which Thea Winslow's contacts at the state attorney general's office were able to confirm within the day. Denton was not a small operation. He had 7 other borrowers in the Charlotte metro area, all of whom had similar stories. The state AG's office had been building a case for months and needed a cooperating witness. Patrick Drummond became that witness. Patrick Drummond became that witness. It was not heroism. It was self-preservation, but the outcome was the same. The charges against Patrick were filed with a condition of cooperation. The fraudulent power of attorney attempt, the forgery of the supporting documentation, the attempted financial elder abuse, all of it was documented. His attorney, a man Patrick found through a colleague and clearly could not actually afford, negotiated a settlement that included restitution, probation, mandatory financial counseling, and a permanent restraining order preventing Patrick from acting in any legal capacity on my behalf or on behalf of my estate. The truck went back to the dealership. I learned later it had been purchased with money from the Denton loan, one of several poor decisions that had cascaded into this moment. Naomi and Patrick separated 4 months later. I did not celebrate that. I did not mourn it either. I called Naomi on a Sunday morning and she cried for a long time and I listened and I said, when she was finished, "Baby, your mother loved you and I love you. But love is not the same as consequence. You made choices. Now you find a way to make different ones." She asked me if I would ever forgive her. I told her that was not a yes or no question, that it would take time and it would take action and it would take her becoming someone who would not have made those choices in the first place, and that I would be watching to see if she was willing to do that work. She said she understood. I believe her, partially. I am an actuary. I deal in probabilities, not certainties. The Loretta Reeves Educational Trust was formally activated 6 months after everything settled. It provides merit and need-based scholarships to first-generation college students in Durham and Wake counties. The first class of recipients was announced in the spring. 12 students. The youngest was 17. The oldest was a 43-year-old woman going back to finish a degree she had started 20 years ago. Loretta would have loved that detail especially. Cliff Abernathy called me when he read about the trust in the local paper. He said he was glad he had spoken up. He said his late wife would have said it was exactly the right thing to do. I told him that Loretta had always said the same thing about his wife, that she was the kind of person who did the right thing before it was easy, and that was the rarest quality there was. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You must have had quite a marriage, you two." I told him we did. 51 years and not one day that I regretted. I live in Raleigh still. The same house, the one that Patrick Drummond looked at and tried to calculate what it was worth, what he could extract from it, what he could redirect into the hole he had dug for himself. It is worth more than he knew. Not because of the market, because Loretta and I built our life inside it, and that is the kind of value you cannot put on a balance sheet. I sit on the back porch most evenings when the weather permits. The dogwoods Loretta planted along the fence line have come back particularly well this spring. She would have been pleased about that. She had opinions about dogwoods. People used to look at me, quiet, careful, deliberate, and assume the engine was idling. They assumed modest meant limited. They assumed patient meant passive. My wife knew better. She spent 51 years being the only person in any room who knew exactly what I was capable of, and she loved me for all of it, including the parts I kept quiet. I burned nothing. I have no letter from Patrick to burn. He sent no letter. That is, I think, its own kind of answer about who he was. But sometimes at night I take out the copy of Loretta's codicil that Audrey gave me, the one with Loretta's signature at the bottom, in the handwriting that got smaller and more careful in those last months, and I read the last paragraph, the one that says, simply, that she trusted me to know when the time was right. That she trusted me to handle it, that she was proud of the man she had married, and that she was sorry she could not be there to see it through with me. She was there. She is always there. That is the only inheritance that has ever mattered to me. I think about Patrick Drummond sometimes. Not with anger. That burned off a long time ago. I think about him the way you think about a miscalculation you made early in a project, the kind you catch before it does permanent damage. He looked at a quiet, careful 64-year-old man, and he saw a target. He saw something that could be taken from, and that tells you everything about what happened to him in the end. Because the world has a way of returning the energy you put into it, not as punishment, not as cosmic justice in any religious sense, but simply as consequence. What you build on a rotten foundation eventually falls. That is not philosophy, that is just physics. What I keep coming back to is Loretta. My wife sitting in a hospital chair with an IV in her arm, thinking clearly enough to call her attorney, to add a codicil, to name Cliff Abernathy as witness, to set up a trust and fund it quietly before she ran out of time. People ask me how a person does that, how you hold that kind of clear-eyed intelligence when everything around you is falling apart. I think the answer is that Loretta spent her whole life practicing it. 35 years in a school building watching children grow into either the best or worst versions of themselves, and she understood that the mind you carry into a crisis is the mind you built long before the crisis arrived. She did not become wise when she got sick. She had been wise when she got sick. She had been wise for decades. The sickness just required her to use it. That is the thing I want to say most clearly, if anyone is listening. I failed my daughter in a specific way, not by loving her too much. You cannot love a child too much. But by never teaching her that love and accountability are the same thing dressed differently. I gave Naomi every advantage I could provide. I co-signed loans. I paid for things. I smoothed the road. And somewhere in all that smoothing, I let her believe that difficulty was optional, that there would always be someone to absorb the consequences of bad choices. Patrick was a bad choice, but Naomi chose him, and she let herself be pulled along by him, and some part of that is on me for never making her practice the discipline of sitting with a hard thing until she figured her own way through it. The character you carry into your adult life is built in the small moments nobody watches. It is built when you tell the truth when the lie would have been easier. It is built when you do the difficult work without someone standing over you requiring it. It is built when you decide, in the privacy of your own mind, what kind of person you are going to be. Naomi is still building that. I believe she is. Loretta would have believed it too. As for me, I am 64 years old and I am fine. I am more than fine. I sit on my back porch and I look at the dogwoods and I think about the 12 students who received the first Loretta Reeves scholarships, and I think about the 43-year-old woman going back to finish her degree, and I think that this is what quiet looks like when it finally speaks. Not loud, not dramatic, just lasting. What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted them sooner or waited the way I did? I read every comment. Tell me what you think.